The first footsteps across the continent, far back in time when ice still held the north in its grip, the ancestors of the native peoples crossed into this land. Their lives were shaped by following herds, learning the turning of the seasons, and listening to the land for knowledge rather than forcing their will upon it. They travelled in small bands, across tundra, through forests, along rivers, carrying tools of stone, baskets of woven grass, and stories of the world in their memory. They observed the flight of birds, the growth of plants, the paths of rivers, every valley, every mountain ridge, every bend in a stream became known not as territory to conquer, but as a relative to understand. They learned when rivers flooded rich soil, when herds migrated, when nuts ripened, when fish returned to spawn. Their lives were not primitive, only quiet, deeply in rhythm with land and time. The slow turning towards settlement. As generations passed, some places on the land drew people back again and again. Places where rivers met, where the soil was rich and dark, where game was plentiful, and where wild grains and native crops could be grown. The first gardens appeared along riverbanks. Squash, sunflowers, beans. No great cities yet, no temples or walls, only families planting seeds into the same soil where their ancestors walked, marking the first step toward civilization. Fire-hardened pots were shaped from river clay. Stone tools were sharpened finer. Storage pits were dug beneath shelters so that winter hunger would be less severe. Over centuries, villages appeared, then grew. People traded baskets for flint, shells for copper, herbs for stone blades. Knowledge moved from river to river like wind through grass. The world takes shape for greatness. By the time forests reach their fullest height and rivers carve their patient paths, the land was no longer only wilderness, it was the cradle of future cities. In the heart of the Central Plains, fertile river valleys were waiting for Cahokia. In the red stone canyons of the southwest, flat-topped mesas watched silently over the ancestors of the Pueblo people. Along the lower Mississippi, near the joining of great rivers, earth waited to be shaped into mounds by the Mississippians. These places, though still quiet, held the potential for monuments, trade routes, astronomical alignments, and vast societies built upon cooperation and spiritual belief. The seeds of civilizations, yet to come people, began to gather not just because of food or shelter, but because of purpose. They came for ceremony, for trade, for the movements of the stars above. They studied sunrises over distant hills, moonlight crossing river plains, the shadows cast by solstices. They built wooden circles to measure the heavens. They shaped clay and earth, lifted stone and timber, wove feathers and copper into sacred regalia. Long before Cahokia rose as the greatest city north of Mexico, its seeds were already resting in the soil. Knowledge, belief, patience, and the memory of thousands of years. And so the land waited. The rivers moved slowly. The wind carried whispers of what was to come, and the first true cities of ancient America lay just beyond the horizon of time. Before great cities rose from the earth, before towering mounds and stone homes touched the horizon, this land was quiet. North America was an endless expanse of forests, rivers, grasslands, and sky. And across these lands walked small bands of people. They carried their lives on their backs, moved with the seasons, and followed the migrations of animals and the ripening of wild plants. They hunted deer and bison. Long ago, they hunted mammoths before they disappeared. They gathered berries, roots, seeds, and nuts. They slept beneath the stars and left only footprints in the soil. Nothing permanent. Nothing that would last beyond a season. Yet slowly, quietly, something began to change. People began to notice the land speaking to them. When seeds of wild plants fell near the places they camped, some of them grew. When they returned to the same riverbanks, they found familiar plants waiting. Squash, goosefoot, sunflowers, little barley. Plants that could feed families. Plants that could be harvested and could be planted again. It did not begin with a grand idea. There was no sudden moment of discovery. Instead, it was gentle, subtle. A quiet understanding passed from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next. That food could be planted, that life could grow around you if you cared for the earth. So they began saving seeds from the strongest plants. They cleared small patches of soil with sticks and stones. They watered them when rains were late, and over time, they no longer had to wander as far. Food was growing near their homes. With this came the first roots of stability. Families built sturdier shelters, homes of wood, clay, grasses, and bark. They stored food in clay pots and dug out pits to last through winter. They prepared not only for the next day, but for the next season, the next year. Small camps grew into villages. Smoke from hearths drifted into the morning sky. Children played beside drying racks of seeds and fish. Elders sat together shaping tools from bone and stone. And for the first time, people began to stay. With time no longer consumed by constant survival, new things began to grow in the human heart. People carved patterns into stone, wove baskets with care, shaped beads from shells carried from distant ocean shores. They painted stories on hides, sang to the rising sun, and told tales around the fire long into the night. Around these fires, elders spoke of where the world came from, of Earth Mother, of Sky Father, of the first hunters and the animals who gave themselves so people might live. Children listened with wide, wondering eyes as sparks rose into the dark sky. Trade began to flow like rivers. Obsidian from the mountains, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf, all passed from hand to hand along forest trails. Villages were no longer alone. They were connected by stories, by tools, by the quiet agreement that life could be shared. The world was changing. Between 2,000 and 1,000 years before the time of Columbus, villages grew larger. People built storage structures, meeting places, and ceremonial grounds. Food surpluses allowed leaders to emerge, spiritual guides to teach, and communities to come together for feasts and rituals. The first seeds of civilization had been planted, not with walls or armies, but with quiet hands placing seeds into soil and hearts deciding to stay. And now, as you rest and breathe softly, imagine those early gardens glistening in morning dew. Imagine the rhythm of grinding stones, the crackle of fire, the laughter of children in the tall grass. This was the beginning. Soon these quiet villages would become something more. They would rise into cities, great mysterious cities like Cahokia, where thousands gathered beneath the watching sun. Sleep gently now, for in the next part, we travel to the first great city of ancient America, the City of the Sun. Before the great earthen pyramids reached toward the sky, before the plazas filled with footsteps and ceremonial fires, the land along the Mississippi River was quiet. It was a place of quiet waters and fertile earth, a land shaped by floods, sunlight, and the timeless movement of clouds. Around this rich landscape, small villages sat near the riverbanks, where people planted squash, sunflowers, and the early strains of maize. The soil was deep and dark, carrying the memory of centuries of river sediment. Each season, the great river nourished the land again. As time passed, the people living here began to change the way they interacted with the land. No longer were they simply inhabitants. They became architects of earth and wood. Food was plentiful along the bottomlands. The river provided fish, mussels, and turtles. Forests supplied deer, elk, and wild berries. With stable food came the chance for something new, the growth of a permanent and organized society. Slowly at first, families began to gather together in larger clusters. Villages that once held only a few households expanded. More storage pits were carved into the earth to preserve dried corn and smoked meat. More hands built homes from bent saplings covered in woven mats and daubed clay. In these places, life no longer revolved solely around survival. People began to envision something larger. The earliest mound of Cahokia began as a simple rise of earth, a platform that lifted a building above the level of the flood waters. But as the years passed, it grew. Workers cut sod from nearby fields, loading it into woven baskets. One by one, they carried the earth on their backs and poured it into shape. Layer after layer, the mound grew until it rose above the treetops, a creation of human will and strength. Around it, more mounds appeared, some flat-topped, others conical, built to hold the honored dead or to support temples, council houses, and ceremonial lodges. Slowly, the land transformed. What was once wild prairie and forest now became a landscape of earthworks, plazas, and structured space. The people organized themselves around these sacred centers. From every direction, trails led inward toward the heart of Cahokia. Fields of maize stretched far around the growing city, golden in the late summer sun. Farmers used digging sticks and stone hoes to break the soil. Women tended gardens of beans, squash, and medicinal plants. Food surpluses filled clay-lined storage pits, ensuring survival through winter and allowing labor to be directed elsewhere, to construction, craftsmanship, and ceremony. Skilled hands shaped stone into tools sharper than bone. Flint was carefully chipped into long blades for knives, triangular forms for arrowheads. Wood was steamed and bent into boughs, strong and flexible. River cane was split and shaped into basket frames, fish traps, and arrow shafts. From riverbanks, potters collected clay to craft vessels hardened in open fires, decorated with swirling patterns that told stories of rivers, storms, and spirits. At the center of Cahokia, a grand plaza unfolded, a flat, open space carefully leveled by human effort. Around its edges, mounds stood like guardians. On the largest of them, known now as Monk's Mound, a great wooden temple rose, aligned with the sun. From this high platform, the passage of time could be seen in the sky. Sunrises and sunsets marked the procession of seasons, guiding planting, harvesting, and the sacred times of renewal. Near the precincts of the central mound, wooden circles were constructed, rings of tall posts set precisely in the earth. These were calendars of the sun, now known as wood henges, measuring solstices and equinoxes. At dawn on certain days, the sun would rise exactly along the posts, casting light across the plaza to strike the temple at the mound's summit. These moments marked not only the turning of the year, but the connection between the heavens and the earth. The population grew. Thousands came to live in the shadow of the mounds, and still more travelled from distant regions to trade or to witness ceremonies. Shells from the Gulf, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, and obsidian from the far west flowed across the plazas. Every item carried stories of distant lands passed through many hands before arriving in Cahokia. In the mornings, fires were lit across the settlement. Smoke curled into the air above thousands of homes. Women ground dried corn into meal using stone mortars and pestles. Men repaired tools, straightened arrow shafts over coals, and prepared for seasonal hunts. Children learned by watching how to weave baskets, gather firewood, and recognize the call of birds on the wind. The city breathed with the rhythm of work, ceremony, and nature. To the east, the river meandered, shimmering beneath the rising sun. To the west, prairies stretched with tall grasses swaying in unseen breezes. Bison roamed far beyond the horizon, while herds of deer moved through woodlands bordering the fields. Every element of life was woven into a larger cycle. The movement of water, the return of the seasons, the flight of birds migrating across the sky. At night, silence settled over Cahokia. The fires dimmed. Above the mounds, the stars formed ancient patterns, unchanged for generations. The great city rested, its people sheltered in their dwellings, listening to the hush of wind through grass and the distant sound of river water against the shore. In that quiet, the city seemed timeless, as if its mounds had always stood there, as if the earth itself had shaped them. But all of it, the earthworks, the fields, the tools, the rituals, were made by human hands and born from human vision. Cahokia was no ordinary settlement. It was the first great city of North America, rising from the soil through cooperation, belief, and the strength of thousands of people who chose to build something that would last beyond their lifetimes. As the first light of morning touched the fertile lands of the Mississippi Valley, the great city of Cahokia awakened slowly, like a vast living organism breathing beneath the sky. Mist settled low over the riverbanks, drifting between wooden homes, earthen mounds, and the sprawling plaza that formed the heart of the settlement. Dew clung to the thatched roofs of dwellings built from saplings, woven mats, and clay-daubed walls. The faint murmur of life emerged in gentle waves, fires rekindled, footsteps on packed earth, the rustle of woven fabrics as people prepared for another day inside the largest city ancient America would ever know. Life unfolded in patterns shaped by the earth, the sun, and the needs of a thriving population. Beyond the great central mounds, rows of homes formed neighborhoods, each one oriented to face communal spaces. Here, families shared tasks, gathering fuel wood, fetching water from nearby streams or wells, tending to the drying racks where herbs, seeds, and maize hung in bundles. Storage pits lay hidden beneath the floors of houses, packed with dried corn, nut meats, smoked fish, and seeds for future planting. These underground reserves were the quiet guardians of survival, ensuring that lean times did not bring hunger. Each household was a center of creation. Clay vessels stood arranged near hearths, their surfaces marked with swirling lines, cross hatches, and symbols of earth and sky. Stone tools, carefully shaped from flint and chert, hung from wooden racks. Arrowheads, hide scrapers, knives and hoes used for cultivation. Fibres from river plants and tree bark were twisted into cordage. Baskets woven from river cane waited to be filled with harvested crops or carried to the bustling market near the central plaza. Agriculture, the lifeblood of Cahokia, stretched outward in precise patterns across the rich soil. Fields of maize stood in neat rows, their golden stalks rising high beneath the sun. Beans curled around the strong stems of corn, while squash sprawled at their bases, shading the ground and preserving moisture. Women and men worked side by side in these fields, using polished digging sticks and stone-bladed hoes to turn the earth, break weeds, and tend the crops. The rhythm of farming matched the seasons, planting in spring, nurturing in summer, harvesting in autumn, and storing through winter's quiet. Within the city, labour specialised as the population grew. Skilled artisans shaped flint into blades and spear points with practiced strikes. In smoky workshops, potters spun clay into vessels, large storage jars, smaller bowls for daily meals, and ceremonial pieces reserved for offerings atop the sacred mounds. Woodworkers carved beams for homes, dug out canoes for river travel, and tall posts for celestial observation circles aligned with the movements of the sun. Each craft took time, knowledge, and patience, and the results spread across the city like threads in a finely woven fabric. Trade flowed through Cahokia like blood through a living body. The central plaza bustled with exchange. From distant coasts came seashells shaped into beads and ornaments. From the far northern forests, copper hammered into gleaming discs and ceremonial plates. From the Appalachian Mountains, sheets of mica and shards of crystal. From western lands, obsidian as dark as night itself. These items passed from one hand to another, not as currency, but as symbols of connection, relationships, and shared belief. At the heart of Cahokia rose the monumental mound known today as Monk's Mound, a massive earthen platform built layer by human hands. On its summit stood a wooden structure used for ceremony and guidance. From here, one could see the entire city, the smoke of distant hearths, the winding river, the distant hills, and the great field that sustained life. Around the mound, broad plazas hosted rituals tied to the rising and setting sun. Dancers moved in patterns around sacred fires. The people marked solstices and equinoxes with quiet reverence, watching as sunlight aligned with carved poles in the wooden sun circle, signaling the turning of seasons. Spiritual life was woven into every act. The people of Cahokia understood their world as a web-linking sky, earth, water, animals, and humans. The mounds themselves were more than architecture. They were portals between realms. The highest platforms rose toward the sky world, home of celestial beings and spirit forces. Conical mounds cradled the remains of honored ancestors, connecting the earth's surface to the world below. Every grain of soil moved to shape these mounds was placed with purpose, every layer representing generations of devotion. Food preparation formed another heartbeat of city life. Stones used for grinding maize, worn smooth by years of repetition, sat near each home's hearth. Dried corn was poured onto the stone surface, crushed into fine meal, and cooked into warm dishes. Squash was sliced and dried in the sun, meat preserved through smoke from low fires. Nuts were cracked, seeds were roasted, and fish pulled from the river were carefully filleted and dried. Meals were shared not only for nourishment, but to bind the community together. Clothing and shelter reflected both practicality and artistry. Tunics made from woven plant fibres or softened hides were decorated with shells and dyed patterns. Moccasins were sewn from soft leather, tailored precisely to the foot. During colder months, cloaks of fur or feathered capes shielded bodies from wind and frost. Inside dwellings, mats and pelts covered clay floors, and small storage sacks held dried berries, herbs, pigments, and tools. Every object had a purpose, crafted not to be wasted but to serve. Children learned by watching. They followed their elders through the fields, to the rivers, to the workshop floors where flint was shaped. They learned to recognize the tracks of deer in the forest soil, the songs of birds at dawn, the best place to gather clay or reeds. Knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next, not through written words, but through practice, memory, and attentiveness to the land. As day stretched into evening, shadows lengthened across the Grand Plaza. The sun dipped low, casting warm light on the earthen mounds, turning their surfaces gold and copper. Families returned from fields and workshops. Fires were lit again, their smoke drifting upward to merge with the cooling sky. Across Cahokia, light flickered through doorways, illuminating faces, tools, and pots as people shared meals at day's end. When darkness finally covered the land, the great city rested. Only the faint glow of coals remained in the hearths. The sky above glittered with ancient patterns of stars, unchanged by time, watched by countless generations. From the summit of the tallest mound, the world seemed vast and quiet, extending far beyond the reach of human light. And in that stillness, Cahokia stood firm, a testament to cooperation, ingenuity, and faith in something greater than any one life. As the seasons turned across the Mississippi floodplain, the great city of Cahokia pulsed with more than daily work and survival. Beneath its busy surface lay a quiet rhythm, one guided not by human schedules, but by the path of the sun, the tilt of the earth, and the movement of stars. Long before written calendars, the people of Cahokia measured time through light and shadow, through sunrise and frost, through the behavior of birds and the silence of winter fields. Their city was not only a place of life, but a living temple, designed to mirror the heavens. At the edge of the central plaza stood a vast circle of wooden posts, now called woodhenge. These towering logs rose from the earth like silent sentinels, each one carefully placed in alignment with celestial events. When the sun reached its highest or lowest point on the horizon, it rose in perfect line with one of the wooden markers. On the morning of the summer solstice, the first rays of light spilled directly over the eastern post and travelled across the plaza to illuminate the steps of the largest earthen mound. On the winter solstice, the sun's path shifted, rising at a different point, its light weaker, colder, announcing the deep heart of winter. At these times of transition, the city moved in quiet coordination. Days before the solstice or equinox, families gathered extra firewood, prepared dried food, and swept walkways between their homes. Baskets of maize, squash, and wild seeds were carried toward the ceremonial grounds. In the distance, the mound stood tall and unmoving, but the people knew these earthen structures were more than soil. They represented the universe itself, the underworld below, the realm of people at the surface and the sky world above, home of stars and shifting winds. On the summit of the tallest mound, where a wooden temple once stood, the land stretched in every direction like a vast tapestry. The plaza below formed a great open plain of packed earth. To the north and south, dwellings clustered in wide arcs. To the east, the Mississippi River shimmered, winding past sandbars and cottonwood trees. At dawn, the sky turned pale blue and then gold. Morning mist lifted slowly from the fields. Different seasons brought different ceremonies. In early spring, as ice melted and river waters swelled, a quiet recognition passed through the city. Seeds from the previous year's harvest were brought out from storage pits, set aside for planting. Clay vessels held sacred corn kernels, those not to be eaten but returned to the ground. On the morning when the first geese flew north overhead, signalling the end of winter, fires were lit across the plaza. From the mound-top temple, the rising sun was watched in silence, as if to ask permission to begin again. During the height of summer, when green maize rose tall and the first pale tassels appeared, the air above the fields shimmered with heat. Beneath the sun's peak, the earth smelled of warm soil, crushed leaves, and distant river clay. This was the time of growing. Prayers were not spoken with words, but offered through action, tending crops, keeping the fields free of weeds, repairing irrigation ditches and tools. In the evenings, people poured water over stone basins, cooling their hands and faces, giving thanks for shade and life. As autumn approached, the great plaza became a place of gathering. After the harvest, baskets overflowed with golden corn, beans dried on strings, squash lined in rows beside hearths. The first frost brought with it the season of gratitude. Around the mounds, fires flickered in shallow stone-lined pits. Offerings of maize meal, dried berries, and carved figurines were placed near the base of the mounds, left for unseen forces that governed season and survival. High above, the temple at the summit stood in stillness. At night, embers glowed across the settlement like a constellation mirroring the stars. Winter brought a different kind of ceremony, one quieter, inward, like a long breath held beneath snow and silence. The fields lay empty, their soil hardened by frost. Smoke curled from every home, rising from hearths deep within clay-walled lodges. Deer hides were brought inside to be softened by hand. Feathers were bound to arrow shafts. Flint was reshaped into sharp new blades by firelight. During the longest night of the year, the people watched the sun rise from behind the lowest horizon post of the Woodhenge Circle. This was the winter solstice, when the world seemed to turn most slowly, when the sun lingered shortest in the sky. Even in the deepest cold, the mounds did not lose their meaning. Snow gathered along their slopes, but they remained part of the landscape, markers of memory. The temple on the central mound looked out across frozen river channels and leafless trees. The plaza lay silent beneath frost, but beneath its surface, within storage pits and under layers of packed earth, life waited. Seeds, tools, and memory, all protected for when spring returned. Ceremonial objects held deep significance. Rattles made of dried gourds filled with seeds were used only during sacred gatherings. Carved stone tablets bore images of birds, serpents, and sunbursts, symbols of journeys between worlds. Pipes carved from red stone carried the scent of burning herbs, drifting upward in thin, unbroken lines. Feathers from hawks and herons were bound into headdresses worn only during particular times of year. None of these items were ornaments alone. They were connections to the unseen. Some mounds were reserved for the departed. These burial mounds rose as gentle slopes of earth, covered in grass or winter snow. Within them rested those who had gone before, laid to rest with shell beads, woven fabrics, stone tools, and clay vessels for the journey beyond. These ancestors were not seen as gone, but only transformed, part of the soil that nourished future harvests. Their presence shaped the city as surely as the temples and plazas. Every season layered meaning onto this landscape, and every layer in turn became part of the vast memory of Cahokia. From planting to harvest, from solstice to equinox, the people lived within a cycle far greater than any individual life. The city breathed with the rhythm of the earth. It rose not only from soil and timber, but from belief that the land was alive, that the sky held wisdom, and that time itself was a circle, returning always to its beginning. When night finally covered the Mississippi Valley, silence fell across the mounds and fields. Stars emerged in crystalline patterns, bright against the dark sky. In that stillness, Cahokia lay as it always had, resting, watching, listening to the quiet pulse of the world. The fires dimmed, the sky turned black and silver, and beneath the weight of time, the city endured. Morning in Cahokia began not with sudden sound, but with a gradual awakening of the earth. Mist hovered low over the marshlands and the winding Mississippi River, while the first light of dawn touched the tops of the earthen mounds, turning their edges gold and soft. From thousands of homes built of wooden posts and woven reeds, smoke curled into the cold air. Inside, small fires burned through the night. Their embers stirred back to life to warm water, prepare grains, and heat stones for cooking. The great city did not wake all at once. Farmers rose first, tying woven belts and stepping quietly into the morning chill. Their fields lay beyond the central plazas, broad stretches of dark, rich soil nourished by river floods. Rows of corn swayed gently in the breeze. Beans curled up their stalks in tight spirals. Squash vines sprawled along the earth, large leaves catching droplets of morning dew. Here, agriculture was not just survival, it was identity. Families knew the soil like a living thing, where it slept when it needed water, how it spoke through cracked dryness or deep colour. As the sun climbed higher, the heart of Cahokia stirred. At the foot of Monk's Mound, the largest earthen pyramid in the Americas, priests and leaders emerged from wooden structures built high above the earth. These buildings, crafted atop the mound's summit, watched over the entire city. From this vantage, one could see thousands of homes, storage buildings, smaller mounds, ceremonial courtyards, and distant forests that fed its people. Around the base of the mounds, work began in every direction. Along the riverbanks, fishermen cast nets weighted with carved stones, pulling up catfish, gar, and mussels. In wooded areas, hunters moved quietly, their arrows tipped with flint, their footsteps soft as the morning breeze. They followed deer trails, paused to read the signs of broken twigs, and listened for the distant drum of woodpeckers in the trees. Near the central plaza, artisans were already at work. Flint knappers struck stone with practiced precision, one blow, then two, until a perfect arrowhead emerged from the core of a rock. Potters shaped wet clay into bowls, bottles, and storage jars, smoothing their surfaces with river pebbles. Some carved spirals and bird shapes into the sides, symbols reflecting the world above and the world below. Blackened clay vessels were fired in open earth pits, covered with grass, ash, and dung to harden them for daily use. Copper workers hammered thin sheets of metal obtained through trade, metal pulled from the Great Lakes region, carried across forests and rivers by distant travellers. They shaped it into small figures, breastplates, and sacred ornaments used in rituals dedicated to the sun, moon, and sky. Bone carvers too played their part. From deer bones, bird wings, and fish spines, they fashioned needles, awls, beads, and flute-like instruments that imitated the songs of wind or the cries of distant birds. Children played between homes, but their play was never without purpose. Boys practiced with small bows, their arrows tipped with rounded stones. They learned by watching, imitating the movements of older hunters. Girls sat beside their mothers and grandmothers, learning how to grind corn between heavy stones until it became fine meal, how to weave baskets that could carry water, how to gather medicinal roots from the edges of the forest. Elders told stories, not with drama or speeches, but with calm, steady voices, lessons about the stars, the floodwaters, the animals, and the spirits that lived in the trees and rivers. As midday came, sunlight washed over Cahokia. People gathered in the shade of thatched roofs. Meals of corn porridge mixed with beans, dried venison, roasted fish, or wild onions were shared. The scent of sage and sweetgrass drifted from small bundles burning in the wind. There was no haste. Life flowed like the river, steady, patient, and deeply connected to the land. In the afternoon, the work continued with quiet determination. Some repaired homes, reinforcing walls with mud plaster, tightening the reeds on roofs before the rains. Others strung beads made from shells across cords of plant fiber, creating jewelry that reflected sunlight in soft white and deep red. Traders returned from journeys, their woven bags filled with goods from faraway lands, obsidian from the mountains, shells from the sea, copper from the northern lakes, mica from the distant Appalachians. The arrival of each new object was a reminder that Cahokia was not isolated, but part of a continent-wide exchange of ideas, beliefs, and materials. Evening came slowly. The sky shifted from gold to pink, then to deep blue. Fires were lit again. Smoke drifted upward from thousands of hearths, weaving a misty veil over the settlement. Frog songs rose from the wetlands, and bats fluttered silently above the river. People ate together, finished their final tasks, and repaired tools for the next day. The great mounds stood dark and silent, but never empty of purpose. They held within them the memories of leaders, the prayers of priests, and the stories of generations. As night fully arrived, the stars emerged, brighter than any torch or fire. Above Cahokia, they formed patterns around the North Star, the same star that aligned the city's great plazas and mounds. Families lay down on sleeping mats inside their homes, wrapped in furs or woven blankets. The last crackle of the hearth faded into warmth and silence, and once more Cahokia rested, patient, eternal, connected to both earth beneath and sky above. Long before stone cities rose in the forests of Cahokia, another civilization was taking form in the arid mesas and deep canyons of the American Southwest. Here, where rains came rarely and winters froze the earth in silence, The ancestral Puebloans shaped a way of life built from stone, sun, and patience. Their world stretched across what is now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, an expanse of high desert plateaus, sheer cliffs, and winding riverbeds that only flowed in certain seasons. The mornings in this land began with stillness. The sky turned from silver to pale red, washing the sandstone cliffs with warm light. Mist gathered faintly over sage and juniper shrubs, then vanished as the sun rose. From sandstone homes nestled into natural alcoves or built along canyon floors, people stepped into the morning air, wrapped in blankets woven from cotton or yucca fiber. Their dwellings were crafted with care, thick stone walls fitted from hand-shaped blocks, plastered with clay, designed to retain warmth through the cold nights and coolness through the harsh afternoon sun. High on the mesas, farmers walked toward their plots of corn, beans, and squash. The land did not offer rich soil or steady rainfall. Instead, it required intimate knowledge of where water traveled after storms, how moisture lingered under gravel, and where canyon floodwaters deposited fertile silt. They planted seeds in hollows outlined with stones to trap precious rain. Dried corn cobs from past harvests hung from rafters inside their homes, reminders of seasons when the rains were kind. Clay pots filled with stored beans and squash seeds lined storage rooms deep within cliff dwellings. Insurance against failure. The heart of their settlements lay not only in their homes, but in the kiva, a round, semi-subterranean chamber dug into the earth, roofed with timber beams and adobe. Each kiva held a sipapu, a small hole in the floor symbolizing the place from which the first people emerged into this world. It was here that prayers were offered to sky, earth, wind, and water. Firelight flickered against plastered walls, casting moving shadows like silent dancers. Rituals performed not for spectacle, but for balance with unseen forces. As the sun climbed, life within their stone villages grew steadily busier. Women ground corn on flat stones, their rhythmic movements wearing deep grooves over years of work. The sound of stone on stone echoed through the alcoves. Men chipped arrowheads from obsidian, and flint gathered through trade, binding them to shafts of willow with sinew. Potters shaped clay into jars and bowls, etched with spirals, step patterns, feathers and clouds, symbols of rain, migration, and the 4 cardinal directions. After shaping, each pot was left to dry in the shade before being fired in open pits, where juniper branches crackled and clay hardened into vessels capable of carrying water or storing life-sustaining grains. At midday, the sun burned fiercely over the canyon walls. Heat shimmered against the stone, and shadows shrank to thin lines beneath ladders and doorways. People retreated into their cool adobe rooms where thick earthen walls shielded them from the intensity of the light. Inside, children sorted dried beans, prepared yucca fibers for weaving, or listened as elders traced constellations onto the smooth dust floors, patterns that told the story of the seasons, migrations of animals, and the moment the Pleiades rose above the horizon, signaling the time to plant. Beyond their settlements, the desert stretched far, wide plains dotted with sagebrush, winding dry creeks, distant mesas shaped like ancient fortresses. But the ancestral Puebloans were not confined to isolation. Footpaths connected them to distant regions, to the north, where turquoise was mined, to the south, where macaws and cacao travelled from Mesoamerica. to the east where bison roamed the plains. From these trade networks came copper bells, seashells, bright feathers, and stories from lands beyond the horizon. As evening approached, long shadows slid down the canyon walls. The sandstone cliffs glowed deep red, then cooled into violet. People gathered on terraces and rooftops to watch the descending sun. Fires were lit inside kivas and homes, and the scent of roasted corn, dried squash, and rabbit meat carried through the air. Pottery jugs filled with water, collected from distant springs or preserved in storage cisterns, were brought out to quench thirst after hours under the sun. The cliffs echoed with soft movement, noisy enough for daily life, yet always respectful of the silence of the land. Night in this world was vast and clear. The Milky Way spanned the sky like a river of light, untouched by smoke or cloud. The people lay down to rest in stone rooms, wrapped in furs and woven blankets. Outside, the wind whispered through canyon cracks and across the tops of mesas. Stars rotated overhead in predictable paths, the same paths used to align their buildings, their kivas, their ceremonial roads, everything, their homes, their rituals, their stories, was connected to sky and stone. And so, in a land where rain could vanish for years and winter could silence even the bravest hunter, the ancestral Puebloans built not only homes, but a way of life in perfect rhythm with sun, wind, and earth. High above the desert floor, in the heart of the Four Corners region, the landscape of Chaco Canyon stretches across arid plains and mesas. The sun rises slowly, casting long shadows across sandstone cliffs, illuminating the ancient streets where once thousands gathered. In this canyon, the ancestral Puebloans undertook their most ambitious architectural achievement, the Great Houses. Constructed from precisely cut sandstone blocks and carefully shaped timber beams, these structures rose in layers of rooms, plazas, and ceremonial spaces, their massive scale a reflection of organization, vision, and labor perfected over generations. Each great house was meticulously aligned with the heavens. Doorways faced cardinal points. Walls echoed with the faintest sounds. Kivas were placed in geometric relationships that mirrored celestial cycles. The most famous of these, Pueblo Bonito, contained hundreds of rooms, each stacked carefully in tiers, with interior walls plastered smooth, adorned with murals of geometric patterns, spirals, and sacred symbols. Timber imported from mountains miles away supported the roofs, and beams were intricately notched and fitted without mortar. Every beam, every stone, every plastered wall bore the imprint of countless hands and countless hours of work. The plaza of each great house formed a hub for ceremonial gatherings. Here, communities assembled at solstices, equinoxes, and harvest celebrations. The sun, moon, and stars were not distant lights, but guides, teachers, and sacred markers. In certain kivas, narrow slots and windows allowed sunlight to penetrate precisely on important days, illuminating altars or ceremonial pits with rays of golden light. These alignments were not accidental. They reflected generations of careful observation, celestial calculation, and spiritual intent. The movements of Venus, the phases of the moon, and the rising of sacred constellations dictated planting cycles, ceremonial times, and the rhythm of life. Life in Chaco Canyon was structured around these great houses. Artisans shaped pottery with intricate designs that spoke of water, mountains, and the wind. Stoneworkers chipped obsidian, flint and turquoise into tools, ornaments and ceremonial items. Farmers tended the surrounding fields, using check dams and terraces to manage scarce water, planting corn, beans and squash in fertile pockets where the river silt had gathered. Women wove cotton and yucca into cloth and rope, while children followed their elders to learn the techniques of life, how to read the land, how to gather firewood without wasting it, how to honor the spirits that lived in the cliffs and rivers. Trade connected Chaco to far-reaching regions, turquoise from distant mountains, macaws and shells from southern lands, copper bells from the north, all flowed into the canyon through a network of paths and roads. These items were more than goods. They were conduits of knowledge, belief, and identity. Each piece carried the memory of distant lands, woven into the social and spiritual fabric of Chacoan life. As the sun sank behind distant mesas, the great houses stood like silent sentinels. The red cliffs glowed, then cooled into purple and deep blue. Shadows deepened, stretching across plazas and kivas, across terraces where families moved quietly, finishing tasks, storing grains, repairing tools, and preparing for the night. Fires flickered in the kivas, illuminating ceremonial chambers with a warm, gentle glow. The canyon walls reflected the light like mirrors, echoing every soft sound, the scrape of a stone against another, the whisper of cloth, the low crackle of embers. Nightfall brought the stars into sharp relief. Above the canyon, the Milky Way arched across the sky, a luminous river that mirrored the channels of water below. The great houses seemed to connect earth and sky, stone and spirit, past and future. People lay down in their homes or kivas, wrapped in furs and blankets, feeling the weight of night and the quiet presence of ancestors. The canyon breathed in unison with the rhythm of wind, sand, and starlight, a vast cathedral carved from stone and human vision. In the stillness of the desert night, Chaco Canyon endured, not merely as shelter, but as a living monument to ingenuity, observation, and belief. Each beam of timber, each stacked stone, each plastered wall was a testament to generations who understood their place in the world, between earth and sky, survival and ceremony, life and memory. And beneath the quiet of the desert stars, the spirit of the ancestral Puebloans watched over the land, eternal and unbroken, their story etched into the cliffs, their legacy woven into the very stones of Chaco Canyon. High above the canyons and valleys of the Four Corners region, the cliffs of Mesa Verde rise like silent sentinels over the desert landscape. Here, in narrow alcoves and natural recesses, the ancestral Puebloans built some of the most remarkable homes in human history. Carefully stacked sandstone blocks formed walls, shaped by hand and set without mortar, creating multi-room dwellings perched hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. Timber beams imported from distant forests supported roofs, while ladders and narrow pathways connected terraces and interior spaces. From a distance, these cliff dwellings appear almost to grow from the rock itself, blending seamlessly into the earth. The mornings here were crisp and clear. Light spilled into the alcoves at precise angles, illuminating rooms that had been quiet throughout the night. Families rose, stretched, and began their routines with practiced efficiency. Inside the stone rooms, smooth clay floors were swept clean, and mats woven from yucca or cotton were arranged carefully for sitting and sleeping. Storage niches held carefully dried corn, beans and squash, while small baskets contained seeds for the next planting season. Each object had its place. Each task had its purpose. The surrounding mesas were carefully cultivated despite the harsh, arid conditions. Shallow terraces caught the rain when it came, channeling water into furrows lined with stone. Corn grew tall against the wind. Beans climbed on supports of wooden poles or along fences of woven reeds. Squash spread low, protecting the soil and conserving moisture. Every planting and every harvest was timed to the movement of the sun and the changing of the seasons. Children helped gather water, collect firewood, and tend small garden plots, learning through observation and repetition. Artisans shaped the rhythm of daily life. Potters molded clay into jars, bowls, and water containers, decorating them with spirals, feathers, and geometric patterns that echoed the natural world. Stoneworkers chipped obsidian and flint into knives, arrowheads, and tools. Women wove cotton and yucca fibers into rope, mats, and clothing. Each item was designed to endure, to serve, and to honor the land and the spirits within it. The kivas, subterranean ceremonial chambers, remained central to spiritual life. Round and cool, they were built into the earth beneath the cliff dwellings. A small sipapu, symbolic of emergence from the underworld, lay at the floor's center. Here, rituals were performed to honor the sun, the rain, the mountains, and ancestors who had come before. The placement of kivas was deliberate, often aligned with the rising or setting of the sun on solstices, connecting each household to the cosmic order. Ceremonial fires cast shadows on plastered walls, dancing with the flicker of ritual and the memory of generations. Daily survival required constant attention. Hunters and gatherers traveled across mesas and canyons, reading the subtle signs of the land. Deer tracks, rabbit burrows, and the faint flight of birds indicated the movements of food. Women and children collected wild herbs, seeds, and nuts, supplementing stored crops. Fishing in nearby streams provided another source of sustenance. Every resource was precious. Waste was unthinkable. Life was a balance between scarcity and abundance, skill and observation, patience and timing. As the sun set behind distant mesas, the canyon walls glowed red and orange, then faded to violet and deep blue. Families gathered inside cliff rooms, sharing meals of roasted corn, beans, and dried meat. The wind whispered through the narrow canyon passages, carrying the faint scent of juniper and sage. Smoke drifted from hearths, curling upward to mingle with the evening sky. From the high alcoves, one could see distant mesas and other cliff settlements, connected by narrow footpaths and stone stairways, a silent network of communities built into the rock. Night transformed the cliffs into a vast observatory. Stars shone with dazzling clarity. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. The constellations guided planting, hunting, and ceremonial life. Every household, every kiva, every stone room was in quiet harmony with the cosmos. The cliff dwellings themselves acted as both shelter and monument, a fusion of necessity and reverence, built to withstand wind, sun, and time itself. Through the still hours of night, the ancestral Puebloans rested in their cliff homes. The air was cool, the land quiet, and the weight of the canyon pressed softly against them. The stone walls held warmth from the day, and the stars above whispered the patterns of life, cycles of sun and moon, of planting and harvest, of birth and passing. In these heights, perched between earth and sky, survival was a testament to ingenuity, patience, and profound respect for the land. Here, amidst sandstone and shadow, the story of the ancestral Puebloans endured, etched into every wall, every terrace, every kiva. An eternal rhythm of life carved in stone and sky. Beyond the high plazas and great mounds of Cahokia, the Mississippian civilization stretched across vast river valleys, fertile plains, and dense forests of what is now the southeastern United States. From the Mississippi to the Ohio, Tennessee, and Missouri rivers, communities thrived in harmony with the land, connected by rivers, trails, and networks of shared knowledge. While each settlement had its own character, they were united by common practices: large central plazas, ceremonial mounds, structured social hierarchies, and complex trade systems. The mornings in these towns were gentle and purposeful. Smoke rose from hearths in homes built of wattle and daub, timber, and thatch. Inside, families prepared food: corn porridge, beans, squash, and river fish, often roasted over open flames or boiled in clay pots. Children ran barefoot across the plaza, learning through observation as adults repaired homes, shaped tools, and prepared for seasonal work. The rhythm of life was steady, measured by the cycles of sun, moon, and river. Agriculture formed the backbone of Mississippian society. Corn, beans, and squash were cultivated in carefully managed fields, enriched by floodwaters or fertilized with composted earth. Along the riverbanks, sunflowers, gourds, and medicinal plants were grown in smaller plots. Farmers read the land with intimate knowledge, noting patterns of rainfall, river swells, and soil color. Storage pits lined with clay preserved surplus harvests, ensuring the community could endure winter or periods of drought. In this fertile world, the abundance of the land allowed large populations to flourish. Trade extended far beyond the immediate region. Rivers were highways, carrying shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, and obsidian from distant lands. Artisans transformed these materials into beads, ornaments, ceremonial blades, and intricately carved figurines. Each item carried meaning, symbols of status, markers of spiritual significance, or instruments for rituals. Trade was not only commerce, it was the circulation of ideas, beliefs, and cultural influence, binding distant communities into a cohesive civilization. Society itself was structured and hierarchical. Central plazas and mounds were not merely architectural achievements, they were expressions of social organization. At the top were chiefs and priests whose authority extended over both spiritual and temporal life. They directed labor for mound construction, organized festivals and ceremonies, and maintained the sacred knowledge that guided agriculture and hunting. Beneath them, skilled artisans, farmers, hunters, and gatherers each contributed to the functioning of the community, while common households maintained the rhythm of daily survival. Ceremonial life played a central role in Mississippian culture. Mounds served as platforms for temples, council houses, or elite residences, and were carefully aligned with celestial phenomena. During solstices, equinoxes, and other sacred days, the community gathered to offer thanks, perform dances, and share food. Firelight flickered across plazas, casting long shadows from carved wooden figures, shells, and copper ornaments. Drums and rattles echoed with steady rhythm, guiding movement, song, and prayer. Even in the quiet of winter, the mounds retained their power, silent witnesses to the cycles of life and the presence of ancestors. Daily survival was closely intertwined with ceremonial purpose. Hunting parties moved through forests and along river valleys, tracking deer, turkey, and smaller game. Fishermen worked in quiet concentration, using nets, spears, and traps to gather sustenance from rivers and streams. Women managed storage, prepared meals, and crafted clothing, mats, and baskets. Children observed every action, learning the skills and wisdom that would carry them into adulthood. Every task, farming, hunting, crafting, trading, was a thread woven into the larger fabric of society. Evenings brought reflection and ritual. Families gathered near fires to eat, repair tools, or work on small crafts. Smoke rose in thin columns, drifting across the central plazas toward the night sky. The stars above served as guides, marking the seasons and reminding all of the cycles of life, death, and renewal. In these hours, the rhythm of the Mississippian civilization was fully apparent, a balance between labor and ceremony, survival and spirituality, earth and sky. As night deepened, the great mounds and plazas rested under a canopy of stars. The sound of wind through the trees, the distant splash of river water, and the rustle of small animals created a quiet symphony. The settlements lay in patient stillness, enduring through time, weather, and generations. And beneath the moonlight, the people of the Mississippian world were united not only by land and river, but by shared knowledge, trade, and the sacred rhythm of life, a civilization built from earth, stone, water, and sky, stretching across a continent and echoing across centuries. Across rivers, valleys, mesas, and deserts, the civilizations of ancient North America were linked by networks far greater than any single settlement. Cahokia, perched on the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi, sent and received goods, ideas, and knowledge along the currents of the great river. To the west, the ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde carved homes into cliffs and built vast stone complexes, while trade routes wound through canyons and plateaus, carrying turquoise, shells, and pottery. To the east and south, Mississippian towns lined river valleys, mounds rising like beacons across the landscape, marking centers of ritual, trade, and social organization. Trade was the lifeblood of connection. Rivers acted as highways, carrying shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, and mica from the Appalachians. Paths through forests and across mesas carried obsidian, carved stone, and brightly colored feathers from distant lands. Items exchanged were not simply practical or decorative. They were imbued with meaning, marking status, honoring ancestors, and celebrating ceremonies. A single shell, polished and drilled for a necklace, might have traveled hundreds of miles, connecting communities separated by mountains, rivers, and deserts. Alongside goods traveled knowledge, observations of the stars, agricultural techniques, and spiritual practices spread across regions, shaping calendars, architecture, and ritual. The great houses of Chaco Canyon shared principles of alignment with the sun and moon. Mounds in Cahokia mirrored similar celestial knowledge, and pottery designs echoed motifs from faraway lands. Every exchange carried a story, a memory, a piece of culture that strengthened the bonds between people who had never seen each other, yet shared understanding across vast distances. Communication was subtle, yet pervasive. Traders, messengers, and skilled travelers acted as living bridges between settlements. They carried not only goods, but also news of harvests, seasonal cycles, and celestial events. Artistic motifs, symbolic carvings, and ceremonial objects reinforced connections. A spiral etched in a chaconne pot might be recognized in Cahokia or in smaller Mississippian towns, speaking a language of shared belief and observation. Rivers, trails, and canyon passes became arteries of continuity, ensuring that the wisdom of the land, the lessons of ancestors, and the rhythms of the cosmos were known far and wide. The people themselves moved with the rhythm of connection. Seasonal migrations, hunting expeditions, and ceremonial gatherings brought communities together. Festivals marked the passage of time, the planting and harvest of crops, and moments of cosmic alignment. Music, dance, and storytelling reinforced shared memory, ensuring that traditions endured across generations. Communities, though separated by geography, participated in a collective identity, a civilization that was not defined by walls alone, but by relationships, trade, and knowledge. Daily life reflected this interconnectedness. Craftsmen shaped objects that carried both utility and meaning. Flint arrowheads, pottery vessels, copper ornaments, and woven textiles circulated along trade routes. Farmers and gatherers provided sustenance for growing populations. Children learned skills, songs, and stories that connected them not only to their immediate family, but to a wider cultural landscape. Every task, every creation, every journey reinforced the invisible threads linking distant peoples and settlements. As night fell across the continent, rivers glittered under the moon, mesas and cliffs cast long shadows, and the mounds of Cahokia stood silent but steadfast. Stars arched across the sky, guiding travelers, informing rituals, and marking the eternal cycle of time. Across hundreds of miles, the communities of the Mississippian world, the Ancestral Puebloans, and other civilizations rested in quiet connection, bound together by trade, observation, and shared wisdom. In the rhythm of daily life and in the grandeur of monumental architecture, the pulse of a continent-spanning civilization continued, a testament to human ingenuity, adaptation, and enduring connection to land, sky, and one another. Life for the great civilizations of ancient North America was a constant negotiation with the land. Though rivers, valleys, and fertile mesas offered sustenance, they also carried risk. Floods could wash away fields in a single night. Droughts left corn stalks withered, rivers shallow and fish scarce. The wind scoured open plains and mesas, carrying dust and sand across settlements. In the forests, wildfires could ignite with lightning's flash, consuming timber and forcing communities to rebuild. Survival demanded knowledge, observation, and a deep understanding of the delicate balance between human activity and the natural world. Agriculture was both the lifeblood and the vulnerability of these civilizations. Cahokia's floodplain fields relied on the rich silt of seasonal river overflows, while careful irrigation and crop rotation ensured that soil remained fertile. The ancestral Puebloans carved terraces and channels into sandstone slopes, capturing rainfall and directing it to corn, beans, and squash. Across the southeastern valleys, Mississippian farmers prepared raised fields and mounds to manage water and reduce erosion. Every seed planted carried hope, and every harvest was a reminder of the fragile dependence on sun, rain, and earth. The seasons dictated the rhythm of life. Spring brought planting, tending, and observation. Summer demanded vigilance. Crops required care. Water sources were monitored, and hunters tracked game in forest and desert alike. Autumn offered harvest, preservation, and preparation for winter's scarcity. Winter was a time of endurance. Stored grains, dried meats, and preserved beans allowed families to survive long months when rivers froze and the earth lay barren beneath frost or snow. Fires within homes and kivas provided warmth, while clothing from animal hides and woven fibers insulated against the chill. Communities relied on collective labor and cooperation. Construction of mounds, terraces, roads, and irrigation channels required hundreds of hands working in unison. Food storage and distribution were managed carefully. Communal granaries ensured that no family went without. Crafting tools, maintaining homes, and preparing ceremonial spaces demanded skill, patience, and organization. Every person had a role, and every task contributed to the survival of the whole. Knowledge passed from generation to generation, teaching children not only how to farm or hunt, but how to read the sky, predict weather, and interpret the signs of the land. Trade too provided resilience. Communities connected by rivers, trails, and mountain passes exchanged food, materials, and knowledge. When local crops failed, traded goods filled the gaps. Shells, copper, obsidian, and pigments moved across vast distances, sustaining both economy and cultural identity. Ideas and innovations, techniques for irrigation, pottery, or weaving, travelled alongside these goods, strengthening the capacity of each settlement to endure challenges. Ritual and ceremony reinforced resilience on a spiritual level. Kivas, plazas, and mound tops were places to honour ancestors, petition the elements, and celebrate life cycles. Prayers and offerings sought rain during dry years, strength during hunting seasons, and protection against disease or disaster. Observations of the sun, moon, and stars guided planting, harvesting, and seasonal festivals. These practices were intertwined with survival itself, offering both practical guidance and moral cohesion, reminding all that they were part of a larger cosmic order. Despite the challenges, these civilizations endured for centuries. Through floods, droughts, and the harshness of deserts and forests, they adapted. They modified landscapes with terraces and raised fields. They developed storage systems and trade networks. They observed the heavens to plan their lives. Their resilience was not merely physical, but cultural and spiritual, a balance between human ingenuity and the forces of nature, a deep respect for the land that sustained them. As night descended, homes glowed with firelight, smoke curling skyward into the star-filled heavens. The wind carried the distant sound of rivers, the rustle of animals, and the whisper of ancestors. Communities rested, protected by knowledge, preparation, and connection. Across the plains, mesas, and river valleys, Cahokia, Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and the Mississippian towns endured in quiet harmony with the world around them, a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the enduring human spirit. In the civilizations of ancient North America, survival and culture were inseparable from the hands that shaped them. Every object, from the simplest tool to the most elaborate ceremonial artifact, reflected knowledge, skill, and a deep understanding of the natural world. Craftsmanship was a form of communication, a bridge between generations, and a means to connect with the earth, the river, and the sky. Stone was among the first materials shaped by human hands. Flint, obsidian, and chert were struck, flaked, and polished into arrowheads, knives, and scrapers. Skilled flint knappers knew the precise angle and force required to transform a raw shard into a tool capable of cutting, hunting, or carving. These tools were essential to survival, used in preparing food, fashioning clothing from hides, constructing homes, and shaping wood and bone. Every strike of stone against stone carried intention and expertise, passed down through generations. Woodcraft complemented stonework in every aspect of life. Timber provided beams for homes, framework for storage structures, poles for climbing, and shafts for arrows and spears. Carving and shaping wood required patience, understanding grain and flexibility, and the knowledge to prevent cracking or breakage. Tools of bone, stone, and copper often aided in precise carving, allowing the creation of both functional objects and intricate ceremonial items. Pottery was a central aspect of cultural expression. Clay was gathered from riverbanks and carefully mixed with tempering materials, such as crushed stone or sand, to strengthen it. Potters shaped vessels for cooking, storage, and ceremonial use, smoothing surfaces with stones, burnishing with fibers, and decorating with intricate patterns. Spirals, step motifs, animal figures, and celestial symbols told stories, recorded knowledge, and marked cultural identity. Fired in open pits or controlled kilns, these vessels survived the heat of cooking and the test of time, carrying the artistry and purpose of their makers across centuries. Weaving and textiles played a similarly vital role. Fibers from cotton, yucca, or plant materials were spun into cords, mats, and clothing. Women and children practiced weaving for hours, creating patterns that reflected the environment, seasonal cycles, and spiritual symbolism. Baskets, ropes, and blankets were not only practical, they were expressions of aesthetic sensibility and technological understanding. The strength of woven materials supported daily labor and survival, while their design carried meaning beyond function. Metalwork, though rarer, marked ceremonial significance. Copper, imported through long-distance trade from northern regions, was hammered into bracelets, bells, figurines, and ritual implements. Artisans shaped metal with precision, using stone and bone tools to refine edges and surfaces. Each copper object held spiritual, social, and aesthetic value, often used in rituals that connected the people to ancestors and cosmic cycles. Even small objects were infused with care. Shells, feathers, and beads were drilled, polished, and strung into necklaces or sewn into clothing. Bone awls and needles allowed for precise stitching. Clay whistles and flutes, carved from animal bones or shaped from pottery, produced sound for ceremonies and daily entertainment. Each creation was a testament to observation, patience, and skill, blending utility with artistry, survival with cultural expression. Crafting was also communal. Young people learned by assisting elders, observing precise movements, and practicing repetition. Apprenticeship ensured the survival of knowledge, while social gatherings and trade allowed designs and techniques to travel between distant communities. A pottery pattern in Chaco Canyon could be echoed in Cahokia centuries later. A flint tool design in Mesa Verde might appear along Mississippian river towns. Through craftsmanship, civilizations were linked not only by trade, but by shared skill, aesthetic vision, and cultural continuity. Evenings often found communities engaged in these practices together. Fires burned in the hearths, illuminating hands shaping clay or weaving fibers. Children sat nearby, learning, imitating, and absorbing the rhythm of work. Outside, stars rose across the sky, guiding patterns in pottery, the timing of harvests and ceremonial rituals. In every creation, the people of Cahokia, the Ancestral Puebloans, and the Mississippians merged practicality, spirituality, and beauty, crafting not just objects, but identity, knowledge, and enduring legacy. For the great civilizations of ancient North America, hunting was both a necessity and a discipline. It required knowledge of terrain, animal behavior, and the tools of the trade. Survival depended on preparation, timing, and skill, while cultural practices intertwined with the rhythm of the hunt. From the dense forests of the Mississippi River Valley to the cliffs and mesas of the Southwest, communities developed techniques that balanced efficiency, reverence, and sustainability. At dawn, hunters prepared for the day. They examined weapons, sharpening flint arrowheads and polishing spear tips. Bows were checked for tension, and cords of sinew were inspected for wear. Arrows were fletched with feathers for precise flight, and spears were balanced for both throwing and thrusting. Every item was a product of craftsmanship, tested through practice, and often personalized to the hunter's hands and strength. Tracking animals demanded deep observation. Hunters studied footprints, droppings, and feeding patterns. The flight of birds, the movement of deer through underbrush, or the tracks of bison across the plains provided subtle signals. The ancestral Puebloans learned the behavior of rabbits and deer along canyon floors, while the Mississippians monitored deer, turkey, and small mammals across rivers and woodlands. Hunters read the land like a living manuscript, understanding its subtle signs and adapting to changes in season, weather, and animal migration. Communities developed strategies for efficiency. Groups set traps, drove animals along narrow corridors, or employed coordinated ambush techniques. Deer might be driven into a shallow pit lined with branches, where a single strike or net could capture them. Rivers were used as natural pathways for fishing, with nets and spears skillfully deployed. Small game provided sustenance through traps or snares, while larger prey demanded cooperation, timing, and strength. In every case, the hunt was a careful balance of patience, observation, and precision. Preparation extended beyond tools. Hunters observed the phases of the moon, the direction of winds, and the patterns of seasonal migration. They ensured that meat could be stored, smoked, or dried for future consumption. Rituals often accompanied the hunt, offerings to the spirits of animals, gestures of gratitude for sustenance, or prayers for success and safety. Respect for the prey was woven into every step, reinforcing the cultural and spiritual dimensions of the act. Women and children contributed in preparation and preservation. Women processed hides, turning them into clothing, blankets, or storage bags. Meat was dried, roasted, or salted, preserving essential protein for harsh winters or lean periods. Bones were carved into tools, awls, and decorative items, while sinew provided thread for weaving or bowstrings. Children learned by observing, practicing small tasks, and understanding the ecosystem that sustained their people. Evening often brought the hunters back to the village. The day's work was measured not only in success, but in skill, endurance, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Fires were lit, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted meat and drying hides. Tools were cleaned, weapons repaired, and ceremonial gratitude offered to ancestors and spirits. The land, the animals and the people existed in an interconnected balance, each depending on the other for survival, continuity, and cultural memory. Across the landscapes of Cahokia, the Ancestral Puebloans, and the Mississippians, hunting was more than a necessity. It was a practice of observation, skill, and reverence. It reinforced knowledge of the environment, strengthened social bonds, and contributed to the resilience of entire communities. As night fell and the stars rose over river valleys, mesas, and cliff dwellings, the echoes of the hunt remained, embedded in stone, in paths, in rituals, and in the enduring rhythm of life. As the sun began to retreat earlier each day and the air turned crisp with the approach of winter, the civilizations of ancient North America faced a season that tested every skill, preparation, and ingenuity. Across river valleys, mesas, and cliff dwellings, the landscape transformed. Frost covered the ground in the morning, rivers slowed, and the wind carried a sharp bite across open plains. In the forests of Cahokia, the Mississippi River froze along its edges. On the high mesas of Chaco Canyon, snow dusted the sandstone cliffs. Survival demanded foresight, adaptation, and intimate knowledge of the land. Homes were central to endurance. In Cahokia, timber and thatch dwellings were insulated with mud and clay, sealing warmth within walls. Inside, hearths glowed with fire, radiating heat throughout the room. Food storage was carefully arranged. Corn, beans, and squash preserved in pits, or clay-lined bins provided sustenance. Families maintained these stores meticulously, rationing, rotating, and protecting them from moisture and pests. Smoke from fires drifted upward through carefully constructed openings, carrying the scent of roasted grains and dried meats across the settlement. The ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest relied on stone and adobe to endure winter's chill. Cliff dwellings retained heat naturally, with thick walls absorbing the warmth of the sun by day and releasing it slowly at night. Kivas, partially subterranean, were especially effective at maintaining temperature, allowing ceremonial gatherings to continue even as the wind howled across the mesas. Floors were lined with mats, hides, and woven blankets, creating layers of insulation. Women and children worked quietly indoors, preparing stored foods, weaving textiles, and mending clothing, while elders shared knowledge of weather patterns and survival techniques. Fire management was both practical and sacred. Maintaining hearths required skill, using small kindling, carefully arranged wood, and sometimes dried dung or plant material to create a steady flame. Smoke served multiple purposes: warming homes, preserving food, and signaling ritual observance. Fires were communal as well as individual, connecting households across villages during cold months. Their glow illuminated workspaces where tools were sharpened, pottery repaired, and fibers woven into clothing, mats, and blankets. Clothing was another critical layer of protection. Animal hides, furs, and woven fibers provided warmth, layered to conserve heat. The ancestral Puebloans used cotton combined with yucca fiber, while Mississippians relied on deer hides and woven textiles. Hoods, leggings, and moccasins insulated extremities, protecting against frostbite and the chill of evening winds. Children learned how to care for these garments, stretching and softening hides, repairing tears, and weaving additional layers as necessity dictated. Food preservation strategies became vital. Dried corn, beans, squash, and meats provided the majority of winter sustenance. Smokehouses, drying racks, and underground pits kept supplies edible for months. Hunting continued when possible, though the cold required careful timing. Deer, rabbit, turkey, and fish were tracked across snow-covered landscapes, and every kill was fully utilized. Bones became tools and ornaments. Sinew provided thread, and hides became clothing or blankets. Nothing was wasted. Every element of the environment was honored and applied to survival. Evening and night brought quiet reflection. Families gathered near the hearth, listening to the wind sweep across plains, cliffs, or rivers. The stars above were bright and familiar, guiding future planting, ceremonial cycles, and survival practices. Stories and rituals preserved memory, reinforced the lessons of the ancestors, and maintained social cohesion through the cold months. Across the landscapes, from Cahokia's Mounds to Chaco Canyon's cliffs and the river towns of the Mississippians, the people endured in a delicate balance of preparation, observation, and respect for the forces of nature. Winter, though harsh, was not merely a season of scarcity. It was a time of endurance, skill, and reflection, when families strengthened bonds, knowledge was passed, and communities demonstrated the ingenuity and resilience that allowed civilizations to thrive for centuries. The warmth of fire, the insulation of stone and hides, and the careful management of food created a rhythm of survival that echoed the cycles of the land. Across valleys, mesas, and rivers, the civilizations of ancient North America rested, enduring winter with patience, foresight, and an intimate understanding of the world around them. Across the landscapes of ancient North America, rivers, valleys, and trails formed the lifelines of civilization. Communities were linked by pathways that carried goods, ideas, and culture across hundreds of miles. From Cahokia's bustling plazas along the Mississippi to the cliffs and mesas of the Ancestral Puebloans, and across the river towns of the Mississippians, trade and communication were essential to survival, prosperity, and cultural cohesion. These networks allowed distant settlements to share materials, knowledge, and spiritual practices, ensuring that no community existed in isolation. Rivers were the most efficient highways. Canoes and rafts glided silently along the currents, carrying loads of shell, copper, obsidian, pottery, and woven goods. Traders navigated twists and turns, reading the flow of water and observing seasonal changes, always mindful of currents, weather, and hidden dangers. In winter, frozen or slowed rivers required adaptation, with overland trails and portages connecting settlements to maintain contact. Trade was a complex system of timing, observation, and trust, ensuring that essential resources reached those in need. Overland paths extended the reach of these networks. Trails wound across mesas, through forests, and along riverbanks, linking cliff dwellings, mound complexes, and open villages. Guides, messengers, and skilled travelers carried not only physical goods but messages, cultural knowledge, and innovations. They observed landmarks, memorized natural features, and used the stars and sun to maintain direction. These journeys, often arduous and lengthy, reinforced bonds between distant communities, enabling cooperation, trade, and shared ceremonial practice. The goods themselves were both practical and symbolic. Turquoise and other stones travelled from the southwest to Cahokia, while copper from northern regions moved south. Shells from the Gulf Coast were polished and incorporated into necklaces, ceremonial objects, and status markers. Pottery, flint tools, woven textiles, and pigments circulated widely, carrying both utility and meaning. A single traded object could embody stories of origin, ancestral lineage, and spiritual significance, creating tangible links between communities separated by geography. Knowledge flowed alongside material goods. Techniques for farming, weaving, pottery, and tool making were shared along trade routes, adapting to new environments and influencing distant practices. Calendrical and astronomical knowledge traveled with travelers, guiding planting, harvesting, and ceremonial cycles. Stories, myths, and ritual practices moved in parallel, creating a cultural continuity that transcended the boundaries of individual settlements. Through these networks, civilizations maintained identity, reinforced beliefs, and coordinated communal efforts across vast distances. Ceremonial exchange strengthened social bonds. Festivals, gatherings, and markets provided occasions for communities to meet, share surplus, and reinforce alliances. Gifts were given and received with care, often accompanied by rituals of gratitude, recognition of hierarchy, or acknowledgement of spiritual power. Participation in these exchanges demonstrated status, reinforced loyalty, and preserved cultural cohesion. Through trade, communication, and ritual, communities created a web of interdependence, linking survival, belief, and innovation. Even in harsh seasons, the networks endured. Winter journeys required planning and adaptation, relying on knowledge of the land, caches of supplies, and collaborative effort. Traders and messengers moved with patience and skill, ensuring that essential goods and information flowed between settlements. The rhythm of rivers and paths, the repetition of seasonal cycles, and the continuity of cultural practice allowed civilizations to thrive despite challenges. The interconnectedness of Cahokia, the Ancestral Puebloans, and Mississippian towns created resilience, innovation, and shared identity, echoing across generations and landscapes. As night fell, the stars above the river valleys, mesas, and cliffs guided travelers home. The movements of rivers, the whispers of winds, and the memory of trails ensured that communities remained in contact, maintaining the invisible threads that tied distant peoples together. Through trade and communication, the civilizations of ancient North America were not isolated islands of survival, but parts of an intricate living network, a web of material, knowledge, and cultural exchange that allowed life, skill, and spirit to endure across centuries. Across the vast landscapes of ancient North America, life was inseparable from the rhythms of the cosmos. Ceremonies and spiritual practice were woven into the fabric of daily existence, guiding agricultural cycles, hunting expeditions, social organization, and survival. From the great mounds of Cahokia to the cliff dwellings of the Ancestral Puebloans, from plazas to kivas, rituals marked the passage of time, connected communities, and honored ancestors, the elements, and the celestial bodies above. In Cahokia, the great central plazas and mound complexes were the heart of ceremonial life. Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the region, rose like a testament to human ambition and cosmic alignment. Temples, council houses, and residences of elite leaders crowned the summit, commanding views of surrounding plazas and streets. Ceremonial activities were organized with meticulous precision. Seasonal festivals aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles, ensuring that agricultural work and spiritual observance were synchronized with the movements of the sun and moon. Drums, rattles, and flutes set a rhythm that guided dance, procession, and meditation, echoing across the plazas and marking the collective pulse of the community. The ancestral Puebloans brought spirituality into the intimate spaces of their cliff dwellings. Kivas, round subterranean chambers, served as sites for prayer, teaching, and ceremony. Small sipapus marked symbolic emergence points, linking participants to the creation story and the ancestors who had come before. Fires burned within, casting flickering shadows on the plastered walls. Ritual tools, pottery, and symbolic carvings connected daily life with the unseen forces of sky, earth, and spirit. Through these practices, the people understood themselves as part of a continuum where human effort, natural cycles, and spiritual presence were intertwined. Among the Mississippians, mounds were both practical and sacred. Platform mounds supported temples, council houses, or elite residences, while ceremonial gatherings in plazas reinforced hierarchy, unity, and communal identity. Offerings of food, crafted objects, and symbolic materials were made to honor the ancestors and spirits of the land. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars dictated the timing of planting, harvesting, and ceremonial events. Celestial alignments were observed, ensuring that rituals maintained harmony between human action and cosmic order. The landscape itself was alive with spiritual significance, every mound, river bend, and hill holding meaning and memory. Ceremony extended into daily life as well. Songs, chants, and the sound of instruments accompanied work in fields, weaving, pottery, and hunting preparation. Spiritual understanding guided the timing of planting and harvest, dictated which animals could be hunted, and informed the treatment of materials gathered from the land. Rituals reinforced moral and social codes, ensuring that survival and ethics were inseparable. Every gift, every offering, and every act of craftsmanship carried both practical and spiritual weight, integrating the sacred into ordinary tasks. Communities were connected through shared ceremonial knowledge. Festivals, dances, and gatherings brought distant settlements into alignment. Goods, knowledge, and symbolic objects traveled along trade routes, reinforcing a collective understanding of the cosmos and communal values. Even in times of hardship, drought, cold, or scarcity, rituals provided guidance, unity, and the reassurance that life followed a larger, predictable rhythm in which humans were participants, not masters. As night fell, the sky stretched overhead, unbroken and brilliant. Stars, planets, and constellations guided reflection and planning, marking the passage of time and seasons. The moon's light illuminated plazas, mounds, cliff dwellings, and river towns, connecting human activity to the cycles of the universe. Fires burned, smoke drifted, and rituals continued in quiet harmony. Through ceremonies and spiritual life, the civilizations of Cahokia, the ancestral Puebloans, and the Mississippians maintained cohesion, resilience, and identity, a testament to the enduring human need to connect earth, sky, and community in the rhythm of existence. Knowledge was the lifeblood of ancient civilizations, preserved, observed, and passed down through generations with care and intention. In Cahokia, the ancestral Puebloans, and Mississippian towns, education was not a separate institution. It was woven into daily life, labor, and ritual. Children learned by watching, listening, and imitating the elders. Every task, from tending crops to weaving, from shaping clay to carving stone, was both practical training and a lesson in cultural continuity. Observation was the first teacher. Young people followed farmers into fields, learning the timing of planting, the careful spacing of corn stalks, and the techniques of irrigation and soil preservation. They followed hunters along riverbanks and forest edges, noting the signs of animal movement, the subtle changes in wind and sky, and the tools that allowed humans to survive alongside nature. In cliff dwellings, children watched adults carefully construct walls, beams, and terraces, absorbing knowledge of engineering, stone selection, and timber use. Each observation was a seed, planted for future skill and responsibility. Hands-on practice transformed observation into mastery. Children were entrusted with small tasks that grew in complexity over time. In Cahokia, young artisans learned to shape clay, flint, and copper, refining skill through repetition. Among the ancestral Puebloans, children helped weave mats, spin fibers, and maintain hearths. In Mississippian towns, they assisted in food preservation, tool sharpening, and construction. Through gradual responsibility, they internalized techniques, judgment, and attention to detail, preparing them to sustain their communities as adults. Storytelling was another pillar of education. Oral narratives preserved history, cosmology, and moral lessons. Myths explained the origins of the sun, the moon, and the cycles of the seasons. Stories recounted the deeds of ancestors, the lessons of survival, and the wisdom of elders. Each tale reinforced observation, memory, and understanding, teaching respect for the land, the people, and the spiritual order. Listening carefully, children absorbed more than history. They absorbed values, ethics, and the frameworks that shaped every decision and action. Ceremony and ritual provided structured instruction. Participation in kiva gatherings, mound ceremonies, or seasonal festivals taught rhythm, discipline, and social responsibility. Young people observed the precise movements of elders, the alignment of structures with the sun and stars, and the proper preparation of ceremonial objects. Through repeated involvement, knowledge became embodied, not merely intellectual. It was passed from hands to hands, from hearth to hearth, from generation to generation, maintaining continuity across centuries. Trade and intercommunity contact also served educational purposes. Visitors brought new techniques, materials, and designs, exposing young people to distant knowledge. Pottery patterns, weaving styles, and tool-making methods travelled along trade networks, enriching local practice and expanding understanding. In this way, education was both local and continental, preserving tradition while integrating innovation. Even in the quiet of daily life, lessons continued. Children learned patience and focus while observing fire, tracking animals, or tending stored crops. They internalized the lessons of climate, soil, river patterns, and seasonal shifts. Every repetition, every correction, and every shared task reinforced the skill and knowledge necessary for survival. The cycle of learning was continuous, seamless, and integral to the endurance of these civilizations. As night fell and the stars rose across plains, mesas, and river valleys, the transmission of knowledge continued in silent rhythm. Elders reflected on the day, children absorbed lessons through observation and action, and the communities rested, strengthened by the understanding that skill, tradition, and wisdom were the true foundations of survival. Across Cahokia, the ancestral Puebloans and Mississippian towns, Education was not a momentary act. It was a continuum, a living thread binding past, present, and future in the enduring story of human ingenuity, culture, and resilience. The civilizations of ancient North America, Cahokia, the Ancestral Puebloans, and the Mississippians were remarkable not only for their scale and innovation, but for the depth of understanding, resilience, and connection that defined their existence. Across river valleys, mesas, forests, and plains, communities flourished by observing, adapting, and honoring the rhythms of the natural and spiritual world. Their lives were a delicate interplay of survival, skill, ritual, and culture, each thread woven into a complex tapestry that endured for centuries. From the towering mounds of Cahokia to the cliff dwellings of Chaco Canyon and the plazas of Mississippian towns, these people shaped the land and were in turn shaped by it. They farmed with precision, hunted with knowledge, and crafted tools and art that blended utility with profound symbolism. They preserved food for harsh winters, maintained trade networks spanning hundreds of miles, and shared knowledge through generations with care and patience. Every object, path, and structure reflected the ingenuity and resilience of human life, while every ritual, ceremony, and story connected them to ancestors, spirits, and the cosmos. Their architecture embodied both practicality and meaning. Earth, stone, and timber were shaped into homes, granaries, and ceremonial spaces designed to endure the elements, support social cohesion, and align with celestial patterns. Mounds and kivas were not mere structures. They were anchors for spiritual life, observatories for the heavens, and symbols of communal effort. Every stone laid, every beam placed, every wall constructed was a testament to collective knowledge, collaboration, and the careful observation of nature. Craftsmanship and art revealed the intertwining of beauty, function, and meaning. Pottery, weaving, carvings, and ceremonial objects carried lessons, symbols, and identity across space and time. Patterns reflected the cycles of the seasons, the movement of celestial bodies, and the stories of ancestors. Trade carried these symbols far and wide, connecting communities in shared understanding. Through art, each civilization told its story, communicated its values, and left a legacy that speaks across millennia. Education and knowledge transmission were integral to survival. Skills were taught not through formal schools, but through observation, apprenticeship, and participation in daily life. Children absorbed wisdom through practice, repetition, and observation of elders. Oral traditions preserve cosmology, survival strategies, and cultural identity. Every task, preparing food, crafting tools, or tending fields, was both practical instruction and a lesson in resilience, teaching future generations to thrive in harmony with the land. Trade, communication, and ceremonial exchange reinforced cohesion across vast distances. Rivers and trails linked settlements, allowing the movement of goods, ideas, and spiritual knowledge. Shells from the Gulf Coast, turquoise from the southwest, copper from the Great Lakes, and obsidian from distant mountains traveled along these networks, carrying both practical value and symbolic meaning. Knowledge of agriculture, craftsmanship, and ritual moved alongside these items, creating a continental system of connection, observation, and adaptation. Despite challenges, droughts, harsh winters, floods, and ecological shifts, these civilizations endured through adaptability, preparation, and cooperation. They cultivated land with care, hunted with precision, preserved resources, and crafted tools that multiplied their ability to survive. Communities supported each other, shared wisdom, and maintained spiritual practices that sustained morale, cultural cohesion, and identity. In every aspect of life, they exemplified the ingenuity, patience, and resilience that are hallmarks of enduring civilizations. The legacy of Cahokia, the Ancestral Puebloans, and the Mississippians is not merely found in mounds, cliff dwellings, or artifacts. It is found in the knowledge they preserved, the networks they maintained, and the rhythms of life they mastered. It is found in the careful observation of the stars, the alignment of fields, the patterns of art, and the passage of wisdom through generations. Their achievements reflect humanity's capacity to adapt, innovate, and create enduring beauty, even in the face of environmental and social challenges. As night falls over river valleys, mesas, and plains, the whispers of the past remain. Fires once burning in homes and kivas, the footsteps of hunters and traders, the songs, stories, and rituals all echo faintly across time. In these echoes, the civilizations live on, teaching us the importance of observation, resilience, creativity, and connection. They remind us that human life is inseparable from the land, the cosmos, and the networks of knowledge that link one generation to the next. The rise of these great civilizations stands as a testament to ingenuity, perseverance, and cultural depth. They shaped landscapes, mastered survival, and expressed meaning through art, architecture, and ritual. Though many centuries have passed, their influence endures, not only in the archaeological record, but in the understanding of how communities can thrive, adapt, and leave a lasting legacy. In remembering their achievements, we honor the ingenuity, vision, and spirit of the people who built the lost cities of ancient America, whose stories, knowledge, and rhythms continue to resonate across time.